Back in the day when wargaming used to create tanks like the borsig, for example, which will be a focus of today's video, they used to actually give them things that were bad. Now, when you compare it to today's meta with the BZ176, which we all know is absolutely fine and balanced, is of course showcasing the age of some of these vehicles. But it's really important to kind of understand that these vehicles are still in the game. You still have to play them if you want to get to tanks like the Jaegeru, and I want to showcase how this thing can still be very, very good, even if the majority of the time there's just better tanks that you could play. But either way, let's jump into some gameplay now to showcase what the top players can do in, of course, the Rheinmetall Borsig Waffenträger. So how exactly can a vehicle like this actually perform within the game under a player called Tog to You Later, which is, of course, a meme in itself. But the Borsig has two main guns that you can use. You have the 12.8 centimeter and you have the big old Chungus, which is the 15 centimeter. That's just absolutely one of the ones that I love using in the Borsig myself. We find that this tank is one of those that primarily you have to play in a way that, you know, it's kind of difficult in today's meta with all of the HE spam that you get with the intuition changes, and everyone knows about the armor of the Borsig since it doesn't have any. Yeah, you can feel very much on the receiving end of a lot of damage, but unfortunately for the enemy AMX 1375, a lovely round goes straight into him and a nice finishing off of that tank. Now, at this point in the battle, it's nice to have picked up 850. Probably should have got some damage earlier on the Cromwell, I believe. But either way, it's not the worst thing in the world. But the central position on Fisherman's Bay is usually where the majority of fighting happens. You can essentially fight over this mid-ridge. You've got the two bushes where if you pull back far enough behind, you can't really get spotted. There is some kind of weird areas in this bush where you can get spotted even when not in it. I think it's probably to do with the line of vision through the tree line or something, but either way, primarily you do remain undetected for most parts. A lot of people usually fire when they're not pulled behind the bush. If you ideally fire when you are pulled behind the bush, then you're going to come out with a lot better of a result. But that's two fires in what, 3 shots, so really nice to have seen. And when you've got a BZ176 on the enemy team and you set him on fire for 1300 damage, I'm sure that our player here, Talk to You Later, is very happy with that result, as I'm always glad to see the BZs just getting farmed. And a lovely shot into the T103, probably a little bit of a feels bad for that vehicle, but you know, it's one of those things that happens in World of Tanks, especially when you're playing just a tank that is not very well aged, I guess. But the Borsig is definitely a tank that has aged well, and that's really the difference between some of these other tier 8 tank destroyers and the Borsig. Since the primary focus of a tank like this is to remain hidden and to dish out your damage quite reliably using German accuracy, because we all know about it, and of course just making sure that you make your hits count, because if you miss with this 15 centimeter, you don't typically get another one, since you only have 1100 hit points, and with only 1100 when you're coming up against tanks that have been recently featured in the game, which with this like kind of ever so kind of moving alpha damage that seems to be getting skewed over to the higher alpha damage, even on tanks like heavy tanks where they're just suddenly getting 700 damage, where they're getting 800 damage, and even more in the case of the BZ. At tier 8 this is. So it feels like with the one-shot capabilities of a lot of tanks, yeah, it's just proving more difficult to play something like this to the highest degree, which is maybe why you don't see as many replays as you once did in World of Tanks. But either way, I thought we'd showcase the Borsig because it is one of those that is kind of like a silent killer, and in the right hands it certainly can be that. But the T103 almost plays luck with his health, and unfortunately for him, he does stay still long enough for the Borsig to remove the remainder of his hit points. But I think the key issues that you find within World of Tanks at the moment is that you have tanks like this, which probably are fairly well balanced in terms of how it plays. You know, you can do 750 alpha. It doesn't have like an insanely quick reload. You don't have any armor, so HE rounds can deal a hell of a lot more damage to you than the standard rounds in the game. And usually, you know, you don't have the biggest mobility, whereas Wargaming are shifting towards this thing where they're like, you know what, we're going to go with just make it faster, make it have more alpha, give it more armor, and then maybe we'll think about one bad thing that the tank might have. And that is of course leading to the innate kind of power creep that we've been having, just constant power creep through every premium iteration, through every new tank release, and probably less so with the tech tree tanks, because, you know, buying premium tanks is Wargaming's focus for the community to actually spend their money on. But you know, it is what it is. It's just been like that since day one, to be honest. But either way, yeah, really enjoyable to watch a borsig just dominate within the games. And we have got 2 replays that we can showcase in today's video, but they are fairly different in terms of the way that you can approach the game, because of course this is the 15 centimeter, but the next one has the 12.8, which is a slightly different playstyle. Of course, has less alpha damage, but it has far more kind of accurate gun that can just basically dominate a little bit more, and be a hell of a lot more consistent than this one. But you know, it's all about remaining fairly steady in a tank like the borsig, where you're not kind of just YOLOing everything. And you can see there what happens with a 15 centimeter as opposed to maybe something that's slightly smaller. So you know, it swings and roundabouts with how you want to play. If you feel like you only have to pull round a corner a few times in a match to be able to pick up over 2,000 damage, then the borsig is probably the best with the 15 centimeter. Maybe if you're a newer player or someone like that, where you can be a little bit more consistent. But of course, this player right here has actually picked up the 3rd mark, and he is using the 15 centimeter. So there's a kind of, I guess that gives you an idea as to maybe which one you can still use. You don't have to use one over the other, and you can maybe mix and match it, to be honest. But yeah, I feel like this tank is certainly a bit of a dominant force. But you can see now in this replay that it's getting kind of close in terms of the end kind of start point compared to the enemy team. And you can see here the 88 against the Jagdpanzer IV finishes him off, and it's not necessarily an instant win in this battle, so you've got to stay a little bit calm in a tank like this. You definitely don't have the accuracy or mobility to move around a whole lot, and if you do move around and you get caught out in an open field like this, you get just absolutely shut down completely, and there's no way that you're going to be able to come away with a decent level of damage if you're YOLOing in this tank. Whereas maybe if you're YOLOing in a BZ, you'll get away with it, but completely different story to playing something like this. And the question I wanted to ask you guys is, do you think there's any point in playing a tank like the borsig with things like the BZ in the game, since you can deal more damage, you've got way better armor, you have better mobility, you've got the speed boost that you can use as well, so you can get out of situations sometimes if you save your boost. And that's really what I'm very, very interested to see what you guys have to say. Now, granted, the penetration on the heat rounds of the borsig are up at 334, which you don't get on the BZ to be able to do this much damage, but you know, it swings and roundabouts. Does the extra penetration mean that much more, or is it fairly similar? So let me know what you guys think about the borsig. You can see here 7,300 damage has been done within this replay so far, and there's still 3 tanks left alive with 800 or 900 damage left on each, or left in total. But KV2, ISU, 87, all of which can be penned very easily. The only problem is trying to advance towards them, and yet again this is the limiting factor, or at least one of the bad things about the borsig, which I really hope Wargaming start to implement. There should be trying to go back to the form where, you know, most tanks have one thing they're really good at, and most of the things being fairly average or worse than the tech tree versions. instead it feels like it's the complete opposite. Everything is fantastic except from one thing, which definitely sucks, especially for someone that maybe wants to play for free, or maybe someone that doesn't want to spend a ton of money on premium tanks, or just wants to play the game as it's supposed to be played, and ends up just coming up against ridiculously unbalanced tanks. But either way, we'll skip ahead a little bit since this game is a bit slow at the minute, and then we can move forward with the next replay slightly after. Although, that being said, ISU gets spotted. Unfortunately, a bad miss there by the borsig. Talk to you. 87 actually gets spotted, so might as well not bother skipping ahead. And you can see here the 87 being a little bit of an annoying tank to come up against, since it does have no chance of really bouncing off of you. But yeah, you can certainly potentially bounce off of it, but with 330 heat pen, it's just never going to happen. But a nice little result there up against the 87, and now it's time to push the advantage towards the last remaining tank, which is the ISU. And on 700 hit points left on his own tank against the ISU, it is kind of like a 50-50 in this scenario, where, you know, if you get spotted, you're going to get hit, you're going to get potentially taken out. And equally, if the ISU gets spotted, he's going to get hit, he's going to get taken out. Which takes no brain box, there's nothing too interesting in that statement. But the key thing is that the borsig over the ISU has the better camo, so you can remain hidden a little bit more. And this is where maybe learning some of the skill within the game kind of comes more nuanced to things like the borsig, as opposed to the new premiums that are like overpowered, because you're not put in scenarios where you have to think a little bit more and learn from your kind of mistakes or things that you do wrong, because in something like a BZ176 you maybe don't get punished for the mistakes that you make. And so yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic, and yeah, please feel free to leave that in the comment section down below as to what you actually think about the state of World of Tanks right now, especially with the kind of ongoing meta changing and moving about. But yeah, with the borsig now just trying to spot the ISU, trying to move up, get into a nice position, not looking like anything too particularly kind of challenging, I guess. I mean, most of the time you're going to be able to deal with the ISU if you do spot him, and to be honest with you, dancing with death against him, it is a 50-50, and even if you don't do anything, the TNH on the team should be able to at least get one shot, since he's only on 131 hit points, and basically both of the tanks left can actually sneeze on the ISU and still finish him off. Now, does take the ISU hit, which leaves him susceptible to the last round, and of course the TNH actually saves the borsig to a degree, or at least takes the final kill of the game. But the borsig comes away with 7,700 damage done, which is outstanding, and yeah, it certainly showcases that you don't have to play the BZ176 to come away with a brilliant result, and hopefully that's what this video has shown you. But of course, let's jump into the next replay with the smaller gun to see whether or not you can still use this tank with that instead. As promised, the next replay is in the borsig with the 12.8 centimeter instead of the 15, and played by Jeffrey, who is going to have an outstanding game of World of Tanks, showcasing the camo, concealment, and generally everything else that you need to really think about with a tank like the borsig, and of course with the much better accuracy of this main armament. Now, you do suffer in penetration, at least on your premium rounds. The standard rounds are pretty nice with 246 pen, which is more than enough to go through most tanks. It has 490 alpha damage per shell, and with the HE rounds that you can certainly use, especially with the intuition perk, and I would highly recommend carrying them for potentially other Waffenträgers or any of the light tanks that might try YOLO you, with the 630 alpha damage that you can deal with them, and of course having 60 pen. One tank that you would hope that you'd be able to remove with a HE round is the Lynx, but unfortunately only manages to deal damage to the tracks, which is a little bit upsetting, but nonetheless not able to get a shot on the Panther just before he reloaded. But either way, it's now time to sit up and camp basically in the nice little spot. You don't need to always move around in a tank like the borsig, especially with the camo that you do have. One thing you have to be very cautious of, however, is trying to remain undetected in somewhere like this spot, because you can get the YOLO light tanks. We all know it when you go into this position, and you do have the enemy light tanks that just YOLO through and then they circle back hoping to get away. Usually, most of the time, they just get taken out either way. But you can see here a nice shell going into the LT-432, finishing them off before trying to go for the shot on the AMX M4. Doesn't typically actually happen within this, but the Barras does indeed get spotted there, which is lovely. Really nice to remove one of those, or at least take a decent chunk of hit points away from him. And at this point you're thinking, well, my team is currently on top, by damage that is, and you're looking at trying to push forward. Unfortunately, the light tank on the team did indeed get taken out, which is kind of disappointing. At least all three of them have, and there is a light tank on the enemy team left alive, the M441, or the Black Dog, or the Grand Final Edition, which is not a tank that is particularly fun to try and outspot, especially if it's just YOLOing around all of the time. It's not the best spotter in the game, but it can be really annoying, and if you do get spotted in a position like this, you can pretty much call it curtains, since you'll be getting hit from the hill over here, the side over here. You'll get all of the people over here as well that might be able to shoot you, and hence why you're seeing Jeffrey decide he's going to pull back. Now, there's a really good position you can use over here, which gives you a bush, I believe. It's over there, or it might be here even, sorry, that you can use to get shots on people that advance over here. But Jeffrey's deciding, you know what, it looks like I'm going to need to help out the team on the northwestern side of the map, and in doing so he relocates back up to where the Spatuk is over here, kind of making his way back over to the north of the map and maybe over towards the Lanson. Puts a nice shell into the Tornvang, which is good, sealing some damage on him and kind of forcing his hand to kind of move backwards. The Barask on their team does indeed get spotted as well, so just trying to feather some shots here, which is what you have to do. You have to be very aware of the situation in a tank like the borsig. You can't just YOLO in, and if you do, you get removed so quickly that you just will never do it again. And so yeah, it's just very, very difficult tank to play in today's meta, and it's very underrated, the fact that there is so many people with the intuition perk that now allows you to swap to HE, which really does ruin this tank. Instead of being a 3-shot for most vehicles, you can actually just be a 2-shot. Things that have autoloaders will just punish you even harder, since sometimes they'll take a clip of HE, and it is warranted in some vehicles, but yeah, it's just can be very, very painful. And even though you do have this nice 490 alpha damage with okay damage per minute, I think you're looking at around 2,500 or somewhere in that region, dependent on what gun you're using. But yeah, you've got to be very, very careful. But excellent use of the bush mechanics, even if it is a tree, since you're kind of up elevated above the tree, and of course they can't get a vision underneath of it. So very weird spot, but either way, nice use of it nonetheless. And he's close enough to be able to get in the view range, which is the ultimate thing of what he's doing here. He's not actually in the open of the field for any reason other than to be forward enough to be able to actually get a shot on the vehicles that are within the render range. Now the Tornvang is slowly approaching towards the spotting range, and so with a nice little move back, hoping to avoid the shell, Panther does get spotted within the render range, and of course you would miss at that point. So the game, the enemy team up by 3 more tanks, and the friendly team up by 2,000 more damage, or just under 1,500 more damage than the enemy team. So, you know, it's in that nice sort of area where if a lot of the enemy team have 490 hit points left, you're going to be able to take out the remaining vehicles quite easily. But now it is not a fun scenario whatsoever. The enemy team have indeed pushed forward, and now it's going to be a 1 versus 7 on the flank, or at least in what seems to be a 1 versus 7, which is not good at all. The enemy team having nearly double the tanks now than the friendly team, so yeah, not fun at all. But you can see here early kind of preemptive moving is going to help out quite a bit. The Boras gets spotted, and hopefully he can get removed without the borsig having to fire, because at this sort of distance you're most likely going to get spotted unless you were to double bush, which is what appears to be happening right now. With the Panther and everything over on the other side, making sure to pull back behind the bush does do indeed, and actually does remain hidden within this game. So nice to see that. Nice to see the game mechanics being used properly, and of course now just trying to push forward towards his teammates, or at least get into a better spotting position where he can spot the people who are going to be coming from behind him without necessarily getting spotted himself. So not particularly the nicest spot to be in, with basically no team support, and you can tell that the Lance and the Scorpion are not looking over this way, so whatever he does spot he's going to have to try and deal with himself. Trying to get back behind the bushes, you can see, unfortunately does indeed get spotted, and this is where it all turns to absolute garbage. The Tornvang appears to have spotted him, the Panthers hit him, you can see the APCR rounds coming in, and he does get taken out. But what I wanted to showcase is that, you know, this tank, very, very good if you know the game mechanics, and with the 12.8 is a lot more accurate, it can be a little bit more versatile than the 15, probably do less damage in those top tier replays, since you can be very consistent at dealing good damage, but maybe excellent damage is more related to the 15cm. But either way, the borsig, you can see, is just... it's definitely a difficult one. If you were in a BZ there, you probably would have come out all okay, because of the fact that, you know, you have a lot more armor, you could have possibly bounced around, but unfortunately in something like this tank you're just not going to be able to. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't play a vehicle like the borsig. In fact, it's a very, very rewarding tank to play, and I've always enjoyed playing this little German tier 8 tank destroyer, and hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, please do subscribe to the channel, as it massively helps it out and it makes the channel spread to more people that might enjoy it too if you did. But if you didn't enjoy it, please let me know in the comment section down below, and how you would like me to adjust the videos if you think I should at all, and if you want to see anything specific, let me know in the comments. But make sure to leave your ideas on what you think about the kind of premium balance and the balancing that's going on in World of Tanks right now, as I'm very, very intrigued to see what you have to think. But other than that, I hope you did enjoy, and I hope you join me back in the next video coming soon. Goodbye.